Hey, everybody, welcome to Ethicsverse Overtime. We finally settled on a name. So we are going to dive in with some the questions from our last episode that we weren't able to get into. I am here with the one and only Rebecca Ream, and we are going to dive into the first one. How can we address, this is a great question from Michelle. So how can we address the fact that the C-suite doesn't care?
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Michelle. It's an interesting one, right? You always want the C-suite to care about ethics and compliance. What I would say is if you're trying to convince them, show scandals at other companies. That is pretty convincing, especially when they see competitors that, paid big fines or under government settlement agreements. I think that can be pretty impactful.
I would also add to that, put it in terms that they care about and try to add some more flavor profiles to your persuasion path. So the pain avoidance is a big one. That's where we spend a lot of time, but there's also a lot of other benefits that come along with a culture of integrity that allow for, more efficient production of whatever the company is doing, higher stock price, all those other positive externalities that you can see on like the Ethisphere, world's most ethical companies. Like all of these positive externalities end up translating into a bottom line that is, better. And I've been playing it, I was doing a return on integrity engagement with a client, and we were really talking about kind of this concept that like ethics equals quality. Safety is to manufacturing what ethics is to knowledge work. And so companies like Alcoa, who have doubled down on safety and manage every meeting and start every meeting with those safety things, they saw so many positive externalities that translated into a much healthier company. Obviously, their safety incidents dropped, but quality in the plant increased, turnover dropped, higher profitability, all those kinds of things. And I think that's a powerful element to incorporate in our persuasion path to help them reframe what the true potential is of this function,
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you have hard data like that, and it shows, hey, there are better business outcomes, I think, that's a great thing to use as well.
So Divya has a great question. She always has great questions. So while measuring organizational culture is valuable, how can we also verify that employees truly grasp its nuance?
Yeah, I like this question. Thanks, Divya. I think it's important that we define what we mean by culture. We throw this word around a lot, but what does it actually mean? So, what comes to mind for me is, well, how do we influence culture, right? Which we talked a lot about last week. And I think this is where you really sit down with managers. Maybe you do a lunch and learn and you say, hey, when we're talking about culture, what we mean is, what are the behaviors every day? And then how are you as a manager influencing that? And let me tell you a little bit about behavioral science, right? What you model to your employees really matters. What the exceptions to policy really matter. They're gonna watch what you do. The things that are barriers are gonna get in the way of them doing the right thing. So I think bringing that knowledge and awareness and being just really clear what we mean by culture and some of the details of what we mean by that, I think can really help push the needle a little bit for managers.
I love that idea of a lunch and learn. And I love the idea of having people from, different levels together to kind of talk about it. We had a client who did something like that and they filmed it just on their iPhones. And from that, they were able to generate a bunch of clips that they went into CapCut and put their logo and stuff on, like very, very simple, very easy. But it allowed for kind of a capturing and then a conveyance of some of these nuanced things that they were trying to make sure everybody was on the same page about, in the setting of a room of a very diverse room of people with different levels and backgrounds and stuff like that.
Yeah. I love that. And what can happen when you actually have those open discussions is, somebody has an idea and you build on it, right? Rather than just compliance continually giving information about here are all the things you can do. Managers and others of different levels saying, well, here's where it's challenging. How do I make it work in this, in this situation? Yeah, I like that a lot.
So we got a great question here. I almost said good, but then I read it and I was like, no, this is a great one from Kathleen. So she said, would you recommend publishing the behavioral metrics, i.e. case closure, turnaround time, things like that, publicly to encourage speak up?
Yeah. So I think that when it comes to, I think certain metrics, yes, you should publish. And I think, some summary data from surveys, for example, but this is talking about more of the behavioral metrics. I think that it depends. So I love the transparency around speak up process, investigations, case management and things like that, so that people understand what they're getting into when they do speak up anonymously or otherwise. So I do like the idea of having some general, like, hey, this is what this process looks like. Usually our turnaround time is about 30 days. You're going to meet with this person and this person. There's going to be a report, whatever it is. There's confidentiality, et cetera. I think it's really good to have transparency around that for that knowledge about organizational justice. I think other behavioral metrics, because as we talked about last week, they're imperfect. Right. I think that it can be, it's not always a great idea to share all of these metrics, because someone may kind of take the wrong message from it. Totally. As you and I talked about, it's a lot about outliers and it's imperfect and you're looking for trends. So having, one data point that's out there may be taken the wrong way. So I would be careful about sharing a lot of these metrics widely. I think they're more to be looked at in the aggregate, probably by leadership, and then shared, as needed, and as it's helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. That's much better than what I was going to say. So let me change what I was going to say a little bit here. No, but I just think we have to begin with the end in mind. What is the purpose of publishing it? Is it to get people comfortable with the process? Is it to get kind of some credit, or to kind of give a peek behind the curtain so that folks know that, hey, if you speak up, we take this very seriously, and here's kind of some proof of it. I think just like any piece of marketing, that's what something like this would be. It would be it's a marketing, right? It's a piece of marketing. So we have to be thinking about well, what action do I want this marketing to drive? And is it participation? Is it just a belief in their hearts that, there's somebody who cares? And I think that can help dictate what we end up publishing. And again, sometimes it's hard to kind of switch hats from, compliance officer to marketer, which we have to do, right, in order to change these behaviors in the organization. But when you're able to make that switch, I think it opens up a lot of opportunity to reimagine what you're presenting, and again, what that's supposed to drive. So to your point, it's not hey, here's our full register of all of our metrics that we look to that we look at to manage the business. There's probably a couple of metrics that you can use as supports for whatever story you're trying to tell, and that piece of collateral to drive that, outcome or that behavior change.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, here's a good one. Here's a another great one. Wow, from Lara. So what are some strategies to improve engagement? We had a robust communication plan last year and offered a raffle of free iPads. Still no improvement in engagement, which stayed at around 33%. That's frustrating. I always think an iPad's going to unleash something,
Right. Yeah. So I think this is an interesting one. Thanks, Laura, for the question. What I would think about is I would step back and say, okay, I didn't get engagement in this activity, but what are my employees getting engaged in general, right? So I support our commercial business, our sales and marketing folks. And if we put something on the company intranet or a broadcast email, the reality is sales reps who are in the field do not have a lot of time to see those kinds of announcements. So that's not, if they don't engage with it, it's not that they necessarily don't care. It's just not how they engage with information in the organization in general, most of the time. So what I like to do is think about going where they are. So going to the business unit meetings, and Smart. So that you're inserting yourself in something they're already engaged in. So that's what I would think about, is think about where are my employees engaged and how do I embed my compliance and ethics messaging into their day-to-day business, their day-to-day work, where they're getting their messaging already, because then you can show the relevance. Hey, it's a business unit town hall. Let me do one slide about some update and let me tie it to their business. And then they'll see, hey, this is just a part of my work. I have a town hall. I get updates on all these things, including compliance. And I think they're more likely to engage in that way. Now, it's a lot more work, or it can be, to go to each individual business unit or group sales unit. But I think the rewards are pretty significant and really can increase engagement.
Yeah. And also the defrustration factor can be a lot lower or higher, right? There's a lot less frustration. I made that up. There's a lot less frustration. It's very frustrating when I'm pushing out communications in this single channel and it's getting no engagement. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of your advice is kind of you got to fish where the fish are. Where are the eyeballs? Yeah. Where is that attention open for me to be able to inject some new information or some new, whatever programs or something like that.
Yeah.
but I mean, people really struggle with that. Why do you think it is? Do you think it's just kind of easier to say, well, I'm just going to send my newsletter? Do you think it seems like a little bit overwhelming to like try to find the nuance of where the eyes are in sales versus manufacturing, or like, different divisions?
Yeah, I think both those things could be true. We in ethics and compliance, we have a message we want to get out. There's a policy update or whatever the thing is. So we're thinking of our way of getting the message out and not necessarily the way each group is going to receive it. I am forgetting the name of the person I stole this from, but I got permission actually, that training and kind of communication, the future of it is just in time, just enough, and just for me, right? You give it to them when they need it. You give them just enough, just what they need. And it's personalized for them. This is like, I'm going to fix my dryer and I go on YouTube at that moment for a short video that will show me what I need at that moment, right? And that's what we all do when we're looking for information, generally. I mean, sometimes we're proactive. We go to, we listen to the podcast and everything. But a lot of the time, especially, field-based salesperson, it's like, what information do they need when, and how do we provide that for them at the right time when they're ready to receive it and more likely to engage with it.
Yeah, it's so difficult because there's all these spheres that each of our stakeholders kind of live in. The work one, their personal one, they're on Instagram. Like these are all different things that they're getting stimuli through. And I mean, when you go on Instagram or you go on Twitter, like that feed is pretty customized for you, right? Like it's kind of what they think you want to see. And then when they look at their feed on Slack or whatever within their organization, there's a lot less customization there. So it's like these expectations start to shift, right? Like how your YouTube example is perfect because like if I need information outside of work, then I know exactly where to go for it. And I get just enough, just in time, just for me, whatever. But then inside of our organizations, there is like a little bit too much of this like one size fits all approach to just delivering the message. And that probably speaks to why a lot of it falls flat or why a lot of it doesn't sort of take root to the extent we want,
Yeah. And I think we've all gotten really good at like, what's a great way to do a learning module, right? An online LMS kind of a thing, X number of slides, this size font, visuals, click, 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 all these things are kind of best practices, but that assumes somebody's actually going to engage with the content to begin with.
Great point.
And you can spend a lot of time putting together communication training, whatever the thing is. And if you simply have a much simpler message, a slide with 4 bullets with some main message, and the time you spend instead is figuring out what is the best avenue for each of these groups to receive that message and when and how much, I think that's time better spent.
That's it's kind of just shifting the work a little bit, but it's kind of more bang for your buck with that time,
Yeah, I think so.
So here's an interesting question from Mizanur. How difficult is it to change culture and align with metrics?
Yeah, I would say it's very difficult to change culture. And aligning with metrics, what I worry about is I would never, it would be hard for me to commit to my leadership that I'm going to do this thing and I guarantee we're going to increase by 10 points in something. I just think it's, culture is so hard. And so I think the key is looking for change over time, moving in the right direction. Okay, we want to improve in this area and trying out a few things to do that. One thing that I've been thinking about with behavioral sciences, let's say you want to try something new. Well, you don't want to waste your energy, right? So you could decide to try a new communication method or something like that and do some testing of it. Do like an A version and a B version, thinking about us as marketers, right? Does the A version or the B version get more engagement? And so you're testing out different things to see if they'll engage and then which pushes the needle on culture. So very hard, but you got to just keep trying. And again, look for improvement. I wouldn't necessarily set hard numbers that you're going to meet.
Yeah. And I think that question is coming from probably this kind of hypothetical situation of what can I give my boss to expect? And they want some kind of certainty. And I think many times we think we have to provide some certainty that says, if I do this, then X is going to be generated and I guarantee it. To your point, a lot of this is very amorphous. A lot of this is, it's hard to pin down. And I think if we can step out of that kind of a conversation and recognize like, what leadership is actually looking for. They just want to handle. And they just want to, I guess it's two things. They want to handle, they want to understand kind of how to hold on to it. And they want confidence that you have a handle on it. And so I think when you're trying something new, that scientific approach you're talking about, that A/B test is great, phenomenal. Also, we can add on to there what our tripwires are around this exercise or around this experiment. And I think, in the absence of like, if we make this investment, this is definitely going to happen, which is kind of risky to sign up for. If we can convey what our kind of risk management apparatus is around this decision or like around this experiment, many times that's enough for them to get the comfort to give you the endorsement, or at least that's been my experience,
Yeah, absolutely.
This is how I know it'll be working. This is how I know it won't be working, We got a great one here from Denny Jacob. Any insights on how companies should deal with the percentage of employees who did not respond to their surveys? It seems that a number of people may decide to stay silent instead of voicing their concerns. This is a big one. This is an important one. And this is one I'm kind of puzzled by.
Yeah. So what I would say is, I think it's a metric in and of itself, right? Percent of employees completing a survey or not, I think can show engagement. And what we talked about last week is when people don't feel like anything's going to be done with the survey results, they're less likely to complete it. So I think it is an indicator of culture, what percentage of people are completing it. So I think that's one piece. It's an indicator for you. And then the other piece is, I've seen some kind of interpretation of, let's say you have a survey and some of the questions, you leave the questions as optional, or you have an NA option, not applicable. And so if people actually complete, they engage with the survey, they do some of the survey, but they skip some questions or click, choose NA for them, where they're pretty broad questions. The question is, well, why did they skip it? Why did they put NA? Maybe it's actually because they feel kind of negatively about it and they didn't really want to put, I strongly disagree. So instead they skipped it or they put NA.
Right.
And so I think there can be an association with that skip or NA with a negative feeling about the question that was asked. So that's something that is also a way to interpret if you have an NA option on your surveys. But again, I think it's one more indicator, and something to track, I think.
We're talking about engagement, we're talking about culture. In our company, since we started doing this thing I'm about to say, we've seen an increase in like participation in these, quarterly surveys we do. And so what goes along with the survey is like a list of all the things, all the changes that have come from people speaking up. I mean, it's a very basic thing,
that's great.
But that participation has kind of increased as a result of that. So people know that they're not just like screaming into a tomato can. Someone's going to do something on the other end. But you just brought something up that was, so smart, that like there's information in the questions. We can't just stop necessarily at the completion rate, because the types of answers you're getting or how those questions are constructed can give you some additional clues.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of data there to dig into.
Okay, so I got one here, another one from Divya. Does any organization do audit for organizational culture?
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially, what we're talking about right now, right? That, an audit or a measurement of culture. I mean, again, I think a lot of organizations and most probably do these anonymous employee surveys, and that's one measure. Audit, I think of as a specific look back in time at a particular area and time period. And I would say an anonymous survey is kind of like that, in that you're taking it at a certain time, but and you can break it down by, different groups. So I've not heard of organizations that are specifically their internal audit function is doing an audit of culture. I've not heard that, but I certainly know that HR and compliance and ethics groups are looking for ways to measure culture, like we're talking about. And so we're all kind of trying to do this, and it's not easy. So
no, it's not easy, and I think the key is just kind of like valid comparability over time. So again, if you pick company A or company B, they're probably going to have a different sort of like cultural assessment, a different sort of methodology. I've seen folks get a lot of false positives when they're jumping from one to the next, from year to year. because this different methodology, they might score on it might go up to 120, another one might go up to 100. And you're like, oh, look, we gained 20 points. Well, it's just like,
right.
It's just the scale is different or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of what we're trying to do all the time is we're trying to both balance and continuous improvement sort of internally in what we're over. And then we're also trying to balance and convey to those external parties, those other stakeholders, leadership, whatever, that we're making progress. We obviously don't want to have a spin job for those folks. We want to have sort of valid data points to convey the progress that we're making. But this is a game of inches. Like, this is a game of continuous improvement. And to your point, there's no company I know of that can come in and say, yep, you have a culture of 78. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just, it's a hard thing to quantify. So here's a great one from Krista. I found that leadership tends to say, well, if these metrics aren't necessarily good or bad, what's the action item here? How do we make it matter to executives? How do we make our conclusions or what we're seeing? How do we make it matter to, executives who are maybe thinking about things in maybe too black and white of a framework,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like that question from Krista. Thank you. So I think that a couple of thoughts. There is no company out there or organization out there that is perfect. Every group has ways to improve. And so what I would say is look for the things you think you're lowest rated in, because again, these are imperfect measures. You could have survey data, maybe it's all inflated, but you still have a lowest rated question. And so on a scale, people are telling you this is what's the worst rated here. They may not feel comfortable saying they strongly disagree, but it's still the lowest rated. So I would, again, look for those outliers, whether it's in survey data or it's through investigations. What is your monitoring team seeing? What's the anecdotal, messaging coming from the field to leaders or something? Take all of that. And as we talked about, it's that mosaic, right? Take all the pieces you can and look for what your gut tells you if there's no clear data, but what your gut tells you is a place to look further, because again, every company can improve, every organization can improve. And so look for outliers, look for the lowest ratings and start there. And I bet, there are companies out there that everything seemed fine. If Theranos comes to mind, right?
Yeah,
but it really wasn't fine. And so I think we just have to accept every organization has issues. Let's see if we can find what those might be and try to do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing. I think I talked about kind of safety earlier. Like, no manufacturing executive is going to be like, we're good on safety. They're going to say like, safety's critical. We have to stay on this. This is a fire that we have to keep burning. This is, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But it's like, everybody still has this kind of backward thinking about this ethics thing. So like, how do we get them to see that correlation? Because to me, it's very, very clear. I see it in my own business. I've seen it in other businesses I've been a part of, that those who care about this ethics thing, everything is different. Everything's better. The bottom line's better. The growth is better. The employee engagement's better. All those kinds of things are better. It seems so correlated with quality, to the same way that safety is correlated with quality in a manufacturing setting. But it's like, well, if there's no action item, then what do we do? It's like, well, I don't know. There's more to improve. There's always more to improve.
Yeah. And what comes to mind, with these, maybe leaders who just, don't want to buy into the stats or the stories or whatever it is, I think stories are helpful. And rather than the stories about the company that got into trouble, maybe it's more like people telling personal stories, because people really connect with personal stories. And if you get, I don't know, business executive up there talking from the company, right? Internal employee talking about a moment they went through, maybe a mistake they made. Those are really powerful, right? Hey, I had this, this moment where it was kind of an integrity moment and I made the wrong, choice, and I've learned from it. And here, let me tell you about it. And that could be another way, a powerful way to kind of convince some people who, that they don't really care about the numbers maybe so much.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, that storytelling is so powerful. And there's really no excuse to not be doing that anymore. I mean, video production or like production of assets has been so democratized, and corresponding with that, like everyone's bar for what they'll watch is falling through the floor. Like half the TikToks I watch are shaky handed. It's clearly filmed in someone's like trailer or car. You know what I'm saying? Like people don't care. And I think if we can loosen up a little bit and kind of go for more iteration, more action, you're going to get a lot more information, and you might uncover something that, you know, you didn't think was going to work that is working phenomenally, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Survey fatigue. This is a great one from Michelle. So survey fatigue is generally caused by the company taking no action on the employees' feedback. That's right. Why should they continue to take surveys if they know the company does not care? Or how do we make people care again after a bad experience? Great question.
Yeah, agreed. Great question. And this goes right to your point earlier, Nick, about what you've done at your company, right? To make sure that people know something's going to be done with your survey data. So I think that if you're in a bad situation, I think you're transparent about it. Hey, we know that in the past we've done these surveys and we haven't always followed up on them. Well, we are committing to you that we're going to. So you do that in the communication as the survey goes out. We're committed to sharing the results with you, or summary of results, and we're committed to having actions out. And here's our timeline for doing that. And then you got to follow through on it. And so this is integrity, right? Committing to something and following through. This is how we build trust in our organizations, and it's the same concept for surveys. So I think you admit mistakes, you work on getting better, you make commitments, you follow through. And I think then you'll see more, engagement with surveys.
The biggest trust killer is like when there's a freaking elephant in the room and no one's talking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, It's so powerful. I think when leadership or, whatever, leadership of an organization or leadership of a team can own something that they messed up on. And I think we all have like naturally a lot of grace for each other because we know nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
But we also have this sort of countervailing kind of need for self-preservation and not, to not get taken advantage of. Mm-hmm. So I think if we can extinguish that with like a little humility and a little bit of transparency, to your point, it really does go a long way. And I think people are open to having they're open to being wrong, particularly in the direction of like what they would hope for. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
So what do we think about this? This is pretty fun.
Yeah, absolutely. This is fun. We got a chance to address these questions. I'm glad we did. So thanks for the time.
Thanks for making some time. Hope you guys like it. And we'll see you on the next one.
Sounds great. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.